So we have all watched the Herculean evacuation effort. We know that thousands of Afghans were able to get out, particularly Afghans who helped U.S. troops and diplomats over the last 20 years. They're now arriving in America as refugees. Many of them will be expected to apply for special visas or humanitarian protection as they begin their new lives. However, the sudden influx is putting a heavy strain on refugee resettlement agencies. So for more on this, I want to bring in our immigration reporter, Camilo Montoya-Galvez. Camilo, I'm so glad you are here. What do these numbers look like? How many people will need to be resettled in the U.S.?
Good morning, Anne-Marie. That is a great question. The U.S. has yet to publicly commit to resettling a specific number of evacuated Afghans and refugees from that country. But what we know, Anne-Marie, is that the U.S. military has been instructed to build up enough housing capacity at 7 military bases across the U.S. mainland to house up to 50,000 Afghans and their families. So this is kind of the ballpark target that we have. 50,000 Afghan refugees could be housed at U.S. military bases. That is the maximum capacity that the military has been instructed to build up at these military sites in Wisconsin, Virginia, New Jersey, and New Mexico to temporarily process these Afghan families before they are relocated to their places of permanent residence here in the U.S. and before they're connected to these nonprofit resettlement agencies, which will help them secure affordable housing and job training, as well as educational services to integrate here into American society. So that is very important to note, and is what is also worth highlighting, Anne-Marie, is that this is a massive operation to resettle close to 50,000 Afghan refugees, but it is still important to highlight that we resettled a lot more Vietnamese refugees after the fall of Saigon in 1975. We evacuated more than 100,000 Vietnamese refugees just in 1975 and allowed them to resettle, most of them in the U.S. And after that, subsequently, we resettled hundreds of thousands of South Asian refugees.
Yeah, that's a very good reminder, Camilo. Afghanistan was a NATO mission involving many European countries. Will those nations step up and also help to absorb the hundreds of thousands of people who had to flee and who are still continuing to attempt to flee?
Yeah, well, several NATO countries like Canada, the United Kingdom, and others like Albania have promised to take in some of these Afghan refugees. Canada, for example, has promised to take up to 20,000 vulnerable Afghans. That is a very significant number for a country with the population and the resources like Canada. Other non-NATO countries like Colombia, countries in Africa, and even South Korea have promised to take in significant numbers of Afghan refugees, but we still don't have a clear picture, Anne-Marie, on how many Afghan refugees will go to specific countries, and again, how many will come here to the U.S. But what is clear, Anne-Marie, is that refugee advocates here in America believe that the U.S. should resettle the bulk of these refugees because, as you know, the U.S. had the largest military presence in this country and the most direct involvement in this 20-year war. So they believe that the U.S. has not just a legal responsibility, but a moral one to help most of these folks.
Camilo, you and I have talked extensively about unaccompanied minors crossing the border with Mexico. But with this influx of Afghans, there are some Afghan refugee children that are arriving in the U.S. without family members. How does that happen? Where are their parents?
Sure. So we know that as of a couple of days ago, at least 34 Afghan refugee children have been designated as unaccompanied minors upon their arrival here on the mainland U.S. We know that some of them were children who traveled with non-parental family members, and because of that, they were designated as unaccompanied minors, and they were subsequently reunited with those family members who were also evacuated here to the States. But we also know that some of these children came truly alone without any family members, and those unaccompanied Afghan children have been transferred to the refugee agency within the Department of Health and Human Services. This is the same office that cares for unaccompanied children who cross the U.S.-Mexico border. So these children will remain in HHS custody at shelters and foster care programs until they become of legal age, or until a sponsor, a family member, comes forward and sponsors these children out of government custody. What is important to underscore here is that, as you know, the vast majority, about 80% of the Central American unaccompanied children who cross the U.S.-Mexico border have family members here. So most are released from government custody to these family members, like one parent, grandparents, uncles, aunts, even cousins. But it is unclear if these Afghan children are going to have family members to sponsor them here, because their families, as you may expect, may be in Afghanistan, and the U.S. may be unable to evacuate them. So refugee advocates are calling on the U.S. government to place these children in long-term foster care programs rather than these large shelters for unaccompanied minors who cross the U.S.-Mexico border.
Yeah, so they can have some sort of stability as they restart their lives. Camilo, thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
So later today, President Biden is set to address his decision to end the war in Afghanistan. That's at around 1:30 Eastern, and we will, of course, stream that live to you here on CBSN when it happens and follow up with discussions and analysis.